Greetings. Thank you for joining us again. This is Will with Perpetual Assets. Very excited to have on the line none other than the Golden Jackass himself, Mr. Jim Willie. He is the editor of the Hat Trick Letter, which is found on goldenjackass.com. Jim, welcome, sir.
Oh, well, it's good to be back. Well, it's, wild times, but we're in the end game now.
It certainly seems as so, Jim. I'm going to start with a quote from your article from a day or two ago. This quote is, "The endless wars seem to lend credence to the desperation by the banker cabal. There might be a new war in a couple months. The chief U.S. export besides toxic bonds, military weapons, and diabetes." Classic. End quote. Classic. I love that quote.
I left out a couple things. There's fracking to destroy groundwater systems. We export that. And we also export chemtrails to produce benzene and other toxic gases in the atmosphere. And we also export genetically modified organisms in the food systems to prepare for the virus outbreaks. So we're involved with a lot of exports. Unfortunately, it's not much in the way of legitimate manufacturing and traditional things like, machine tools and automobiles and washing machines. No, we outsourced all that.
But Jim, let's not sell short the what it takes to actually manufacture a bioweapon.
Well, that's got a funny downside to it. When there was a great deal of research about 15 years ago during, I think, the Clinton administration, late years of the Clinton administration, there was a big research project on bringing in all the Spanish flu information and virus details from 1917 outbreak. So there was a big recruiting effort for biological virus-type chemists. And when they were done, they were all murdered. So, we're not the good guys anymore. And furthermore, I've got an interesting little contrast. I like to read my own quote. It's from the same article. I put some time into these articles, and sometimes I sit back and spend a few minutes on a single line just to get the wording the way I want it. And it's not so much perfectionism as, this could be a quotable thing, and let's just make it right. And I know I can do better, so it's kind of my dad's influence. I'll work on that again, Jim. I used to have a manager who said, do a little more cooking on that. But here's a quote that brings out the contrasts of pipelines. As the major conflict between East and West is played out between Russia and the United States, bear in mind an important contrast. The Russians have a vast network of natural gas pipelines, which are being fought over in Ukraine. The pipelines supply energy to the many economies of Europe, both industry and households. The United States has a vast network of toxic flow in contaminated money, evident in the U.S. Treasury bond market, the Forex currency market, and the banking systems. The pipeline is for tainted funds. The pipeline for tainted funds contains channels, windows, tubes, side ports, plumbing, and levers, just like any giant chemical plant. The trouble is that the U.S. network of liquidity is toxic and leads to destroyed capital and economic ruin. The U.S. will not win this battle against Russia. It will earn isolation instead, even from its own allies, like in Europe. The U.S. is soon to become a pariah nation. I think, I had a theme that I drove home a year ago and 18 months ago with certain interviews. This is one more event that will lead to U.S. isolation. And we've got other things that are very important now working toward isolation, and that are things like NSA spying of the German government and German telecom and German parliament. You don't do that with allies. So you earn contempt and you earn your own isolation. So we're going to lose Western Europe. They're going to break up their European Union. They're going to abandon NATO. They're going to be working with Russia and China because they don't want economic ruin and isolation like what comes to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this makes sense to you, Will, but I don't know. Just bounce that off you. Do you concur in the isolation? Anything you'd like to add to the isolation? Because, there's so many things. We're doing everything wrong. We're defending a broken system with more criminality and corruption.
I couldn't agree more, Jim. It seems to me that the rest of the world, power players anyway, know the jig is up. They know what's going on. I mean, I have here in my notes the Chinese strategy, which I'm sure we'll visit on in a minute, and a quote from the book, The Art of War. Isolationism hits. It looks like the current criminal cabal in charge of the U.S. is delusional and doesn't realize, hey, guess what? You're about to piss in the punch bowl and isolate yourselves forever. I mean, toxic exports. It's a joke, and the world stage. I can't believe, it looks like Putin and the Chinese. It looks like the powers that be on the world stage are playing the cards right and tricking the big dummy and the big bully on the playground.
Yeah, well, I've got some news items that kind of confirm the messed up situation and how we're approaching a climax of sorts. It's impossible to know when it'll happen, but I'm hearing a lot of reports from my best sources, my smartest contacts. Look for something on or about, possibly after the Chinese New Year in February. I think we're going to have some big events before then. I don't think we're going to have collapse events, but let's just review. Let me review, without follow-up, a number of different varied stories from varied sectors that indicate to me we're really messed up here. Let's just start with what I believe to be a murder of the French energy company CEO from Total. His name is Christophe de Margerie. And he made some statements in July about there's no real need for oil to be traded in the dollar. He also had some regular meetings with Iran to develop their energy. Okay, let's move on. The Saudi Riyal just had a horrible week in their forward contract for their currency. It was almost cut in half, which means that around the corner, the Saudi currency is going to experience a pretty sharp drop. So what's that going to be from? Dumping the treasuries at discount? I don't know. All right, then you've got another one. Amazon had a big earnings mess. And just a week before, Sears did the same, which I think is going to enter bankruptcy very quickly. The Fed just had an announcement of $4.8 trillion on their balance sheet. So the central bank that operates in the Western world with headquarters in the United States, they have the gall to say that that big balance sheet bulge is going to provide impetus to the U.S. economy down the road. Well, that's like saying I've got a huge boil on my face, it's full of pus, and I'm going to feed my baby with it. No, it's more like evidence of a third world nation unable to finance its own debt, so it collects like financial pus at the central bank door. Then you had Dominic Strauss-Kahn, his partner, the French fellow, name is Thierry Lane. He took a flying lesson. He was their hedge fund manager, but he took a flying lesson in Tel Aviv out of the 23rd story window. I don't quote me, but I don't think he wore a parachute. Okay, then you've got the BRICS nations making a huge announcement. They call it the New Asian Infrastructure Bank. Can you say competitor to the World Bank? I didn't say it very well. Can you say competitor to the World Bank? Well, the U.S. put a lot of pressure on European nations and Korea and Japan not to sign on. They will later. Then you had a mining industry news item. First Majestic is kind of declaring a strike on the COMEX. They withheld almost half of their silver mine output, and they're going to put it into inventory. They're not going to sell it into this corrupted market. Then you had California a news item that 1 billion, as in boy, billion gallons of water in their aquifers is toxic.
Great.
From fracking. Then you have, I think, the shill. He's half clown, half genius, and who the hell knows and who the hell cares which is which. But Jim Rickards, the former gold counselor for the long-term capital management disaster fiasco wreckage site that lost almost all the Bank of Italy's gold, but he gets to write a book and get rich and be on talk shows. The clown shill is now saying that the central banks of the West are going to be bailed out by $4 trillion from the IMF, from their reformed SDRs, the special deposit rights. Gosh, that's just delusion with a capital D. I don't think Russia and China are going to be touching that SDR from the IMF with a 10-foot effing pole. The reform would involve, okay, they had four currencies in that now, the dollar, the British pound, the euro, and the yen. And I think someone mentioned the franc is in there, but I'm not sure. It might have a very small ratio, a small weight. All right, it's going to have four, the proposal is that the reformed super sovereign will have four more. The Chinese yuan, the Russian ruble, gold, and silver. Now, that's an interesting combination of, not so much toxic money, but paper money. Maybe it's going to be gold-backed yuan, gold-backed ruble, and gold, and silver. Or maybe they'll just say, screw the IMF, we're going to do this our way, and it's going to be called the BRICS gold-backed currency. That's what I think is coming, and that's what my sources, including The Voice, are telling me. They're going to skip the IMF SDR. They're going to skip any other kind of patchwork for the broken fiat currencies, and they're going to go straight to a gold-backed currency with the BRICS nations. And I'm looking, for a closer by event that might supersede that. But anyway, that's a review, Will, of the news items, and we're not in a healthy state financially or economically. We're getting more broken by the month. And here's a simple principle to operate by. As long as QE is in place, we're working toward the systemic breakdown and the U.S. government debt default, which might have already happened.
And if QE were to stop, which I don't think it would, do you? I mean, I think you hold true that it's going to continue until everything goes poof.
Yeah, the QE, if they try to stop, they're going to get an amplified response much worse than they did when they did the taper talk, which was in the late summer of 2013. The financial markets went a little nutty. The bond market sold off. The stock market sold off. The banking system had jitters. You can't do that.
That was just talk.
That was just talk. But I think behind the talk, they were withdrawing as kind of trial experiments to see what would happen to the financial markets if they withdrew a little bit, just a little bit of the $80 billion a month, which I think is very understated. I think it's more like $200 to $300 billion a month, because they never talk about bailing out and covering with monetized debt, covering through monetization. They never talk about covering the derivatives. And we know that the London whale made evident the distress of the derivatives.
Right.
So why do they never talk about them? Easy. Because the bailouts with QE to involve the derivatives are bigger than all the other bailouts combined. Mm-hmm. I think they've got 100 to 200 billion a month in derivative coverage.
Trillions.
I'm talking interest rate swap contracts that went bad, credit default swaps, which are bond insurance, that went bad. I mean, this is all broken. The theme of the article that I put out yesterday was the folly of paper mache solutions. Mm-hmm. So,
Jim, I have here in my notes after reading the article, and this plays into the derivatives piece. You mentioned regarding interest rate swaps. I just took a little note that says interest rate swaps propping up the whole system, question mark. You have a quote here, if I can. It says, the key need is for free money to feed the interest rate swap machinery, new fat bond demand at no cost. The second is the Wall Street bond carry trade. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, this relates to the second item in the article. The U.S. Treasuries can be propped up regularly by elaborate papier-mâché machinery and pipelines, but they can't do it permanently because things break. Now, notice as background that I think it was in the middle of 2013, maybe around May or so, I can't get the exact month, but the U.S. government and the Congress suspended the debt limit. Well, what's that all about? So when you suspend the debt limit, it tells me that it's no longer relevant. It's no longer in need to conform with law. What? Did they already default? Is that why? Is that why J.P. Morgan had to yield its headquarters in South Manhattan? Is that why China took a very serious, possibly majority stake in the Federal Reserve? No, we got some very big hidden events that the government doesn't not want to talk about. But you mentioned two things. It's the interest rate swaps and the carry trade. And let me just cover that now for a minute. When you don't have buyers for the U.S. government debt, which is securitized in the form of treasury bonds, you have to do some extraordinary things. This is what third world nations do. I keep saying that. This is what third world nations do. They rely on inflation to finance their debt. They monetize their debt. They put on methods, techniques, and apparatuses that basically institutionalize hyperinflation. We're calling it stimulus. Since when is hyperinflation stimulus? It's not stimulus. So we made two major devices, and one gets talked about. Three devices. One gets talked about and two are not. The device that is talked about is the QE. It's the quantitative easing, which is a very strange term. All it means is they print money and they buy treasury debt. They buy treasury bonds. They cover the U.S. government debt with printed money. Since when is that good? This is what third world nations do. Now, they talk about covering mortgage bonds. They talk about covering treasury bonds. They also talk with lies about reducing. Oh, no, it's no longer 85 billion a month. It's only 41, 42, 40. They lied a couple months ago in September, a month ago in September, and they said that the U.S. government debt, after certain adjustments, is only $580 billion. Well, how about if you just take the debt at the end of fiscal 2014 and take the debt at the end of fiscal 2013 and subtract the two, like a fourth grade student could do. You get $1.1 trillion additional debt. So what's this high-paid accountant and Wall Street guy? These Wall Street guys make $250,000 each. So what do? They tell you that the debt is only $580 billion for the U.S. government, when it's really double that. Who are these guys? All right, so we are told about QE, but we're not told about the interest rate swap derivatives. We got lied to about the London whale. In May and June of 2012, J.P. Morgan had an accident, and it was accidentally revealed that Bruno Ixel, a.k.a. the London whale, lost a shitload of money. And we were told that it was based on a certain quarter of bad performance of sovereign bonds in Southern Europe. Well, Rob Kirby and I quickly did some research. Took us 5 minutes. And we decided, no, all those bonds in Italy and Portugal and Greece and Spain, they all improved. So where's the basis of the loss for the London whale? Oh, how about let's check to see if it was in treasury bonds. Yes, it had a big sell-off in treasury bonds. And yes, interest rate derivatives do not respond well to them. So Rather than the $250,000 a year salary Wall Street boys who gave you lies, us poor guys in the corner, the gold advocates, sound money, we did a little research. It took us 20 minutes, and we concluded that the interest rate swaps were causing pretty heavy losses. The voice told me, Jim, it's not 1 billion, as they say. It's more like 100 billion, but you're going to hear 10 billion next. Okay, well, now we're here after 2 years have passed. We've been told it's $8.7 billion. No, it's really more like 100. And the verification is the London-based J.P. Morgan guys who are flying out of windows. Mm-hmm. They know the London whale size loss, right, and they're going to come forward. But you can't have that. So they went flying instead of coming forward. The third hidden source to support, well, I should finish on the interest rate derivatives. The interest rate derivatives produce artificial demand for long-term bonds. And they do that by taking zero-cost money, the short-term Fed funds rate, what is it, 0.25%? Mm-hmm. Gosh, it might go up to 0.375%. Why don't we just call it zero? So they take the free money, they put it in through a couple of steps in processing in the interest rate derivative machinery, and it pops out as huge long-term treasury bond demand. Now, what's the key requirement to produce this long-term treasury bond demand? Free money on the input stream. So you're never going to see the 0% move for the interest rate derivative standpoint because they need it for the free money on the input. The third type is carry trade, and this is not new, and I was absolutely astonished when I talked with Kurt Rickenbacker in August of 2003. He's a good guy. He's deceased. But let me just mention that he never heard of the yen carry trade, which caused a very unusual incident for us where he started yelling at me out of embarrassment. What they do is they borrow free money. Remember, Japan had 0% for the longest time. Yep. It still does. You don't get away from 0%, ever. Well, in the U.S., we now have, for the last few years, ever since they made money free, we have Wall Street engaging in the bond carry trade. They short the bills, the short-term bill. They borrow short-term money and invest in long-term bonds. Or they do a spread trade of the Treasury bill short-term versus the long-term. So they short-term, go long-term. The leverage on the Treasury bond futures is, I think, 25-fold. So they're earning 25, if that's correct, could be 30. They're earning 25 times the 2.5%.
Wow.
That's not bad, 50% return. That's not bad. You can make a living off that, and they do, because they don't lend money to the U.S. economy.
It's free money.
It's free money. Now, do you think that the Fed is going to raise the interest rates on their buddies in Wall Street and wreck their carry trade? I don't think so. So the 0% is going to be on forever. Those are the three sources that keep things going.
Interesting.
I don't think it's going to change. That's why I said I anticipated some of these things. I anticipated the bond carry trade. And I also anticipated back in 2009 when we first saw the 0%. Heck, it might have been, 0.5% or 0.25%. Can we just call it zero? They don't like to call it zero. But, there's a nasty little acronym, ZIRP, Zero Interest Rate Policy. It calls it zero, and that's an accurate thing to do. It's justified. So I thought back in 2009, we're never going to get away from zero because they're going to get leverage trades in there with the spread. And I didn't fully anticipate the interest rate derivatives in there, but it just adds on fuel to that fire. But I also thought that if they made low-cost car loans and mortgage loans for homes, they're not going to double those rates because they'll destroy those two sectors. So we're in it forever. I call it zero interest rate, ZIRP forever, and I call it QE to infinity.
So it's not only smoke and mirrors to keep people asleep, the illusion that everything is still okay, but it's also a complete scam for them to print money on the back end and put it in their pockets.
Well, it also is fuel for their carry trade.
Mm-hmm.
There's no work involved.
Right.
You borrow money at 0.5%. You invest at 2.5%.
Yeah.
You make 2% profit. You multiply it by 25 with leveraged futures contracts, and you get a wink and a nod from the Fed that they're not going to raise rates. Mm-hmm. This is not complicated.
Right.
And as for the QE, that's going to go on forever because they're supporting not only the bond market and the mortgage market, they're supporting the stock market. Mm-hmm. They're supporting the bank industry. You know, they're still covering the ruined portfolios from Wall Street banks. They can't do it all at once because there's too much of it, so they do a little bit every month. Mm-hmm. And don't worry, in a few years they'll cover almost all of it. We got new subprime debt problems, Will. We got student loans and we got car loans. Yep. The car loans are now typically 5, 7, 8 years. The joke among the car dealers is that they're underwater when they drive out of the lot. Mm-hmm. Because you get the depreciation on the first year, which puts them into negative territory. You can't sell mortgage bonds that are asset-backed with secure stream on car loans. Mm-hmm. There's no equity in them. So what do? They sell them to the pension funds, and they load them in secretive little tranches on other asset-backed mortgages, and the fools buy them. Why? Because they're chasing yield. Treasuries don't offer any yield, but these shit bonds do.
Is BlackRock going to be buying vehicles next?
I don't know. They're having a backfire, I heard, at least in 2 markets. I've got clients who report to me firsthand experience what's happened to Blackstone and the private equity firms in the 2 markets of Miami and Greater Cleveland. Mm-hmm. And the story is the same for both. Big backfire, angry tenants. Some of them have taken shots at the bankers and collectors who come. They vandalize the homes. Wow. They raid them of their plumbing. They bang up all the light fixtures. They slam it in all the mirrors. They slam all the banisters. And the private equity firms say, damn, we can't rent these. I mean, what's complicated about this? So if 2 markets are like that, my guess is that 12 markets are like that. Mm-hmm. So this is not going to get fixed.
Right.
We're marching towards systemic failure. This is not getting fixed. We've got a galloping recession. I think we're going to see an official number of 2 to 3% recession for the 4th quarter that we're now into.
Wow.
October, November, December. Yeah, we're in the last quarter. And, you know, they've always produced a crisis to blame it on. I mean, they blamed it on the winter for the second quarter. Now they're going to blame it on Ebola. People are staying inside. They're not shopping because of the Ebola outbreak. My gosh. Hey, simple comment. I don't want to get into much of Ebola, but two simple comments regarding Ebola. Mm-hmm. Why does the U.S. ship in victims from Western Africa?
Oh, it's because we have the best health care in the world, Jim.
I thought there's quarantine protocol. Second, why does the Atlanta Center for Disease Control have a patent on this fabricated laboratory disease called Ebola?
Yeah.
It's a super virus. Because there's money to be made from killing you.
The patent is, I mean, that's the smoking gun, right? You look in the U.S. patent records and you find a patent number for whether it be a virus or how about a noxious cocktail of chemicals that is meant to be sprayed from an airplane. I mean, look it up. If you doubt geoengineering, look at the patents that exist on aerosols to be sprayed from planes. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised to find that the Rockefeller family behind most of these patents. Mm-hmm. All right, let's leave that topic alone. It's pretty dicey.
Yeah, it is. It is. Maybe we should move on to gold, Jim.
Well, I'd like to mention that the banking systems have the same type of paper mache patches. It's an easier topic to cover, mm-hmm. But You know, you had Royal Bank of Scotland in the UK. You have Bank of America. A lot of different big banks had near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
The most recent was one in Portugal, one of their three biggest, called Banco Espírito Santo. Kind of a strange name, but it's one of their big banks. And you know, we thought that it was going to cause a contagion event. Well, the contagion is prevented, Will, from the widespread application of paper mache. The Draghi Euro Central Bank, they did something unique. They came up with something called the LTFO, the long-term finance operations. Basic patches, but they did something clever. They called it super seniority, which meant that what they printed and sold as a bond for covering these debts, you know, one bond covers another. They set it up as super senior where it had higher seniority than sovereign bonds. So you have a real Uber Lord event with Prince Draghi creating an instrument that is higher in seniority than, say, French or Italian or Spanish sovereign debt. The German High Court said that's illegal. Okay.
Boys later today.
That's coming. Sorry, I just had a disturbance here. I lost my point. The Germans are not going to tolerate this. They are, I think, creating a list of indictments.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the Euro Central Bank and their phony money. You've got the NSA spying of their not just Merkel and her office. It's spying of the Parliament. Mm-hmm. And of major corporations like Siemens. Siemens is their big telecom company. Mm-hmm. Think cell phones. Yep. There's a third charge of the Russian sanctions. That's doing harm to the German industry. Mm-hmm. And the fourth and final is the Germans want their gold back. U.S. stole their gold. U.S. and London stole their gold. It bears repeating. The U.S. and London stole the German gold. Mm-hmm. This is not what honorable governments do. It's what fascists do. Mm-hmm. Fascists attack their enemies and defraud their allies, earning total isolation. That's what's coming. Yep. All right, that's all I care to say about the the banking system. You can't cover it forever with the paper mache. Mm-hmm. You run out of credibility. These banks are hollow reeds.
Wow. You know, and it's interesting, Jim, the Banco Espírito Santo, even, you know, a couple years ago, Bank of America getting in trouble, and then it leaves the news. You know, it's gone. Oh, there's new terrible ISIS and Ebola, and there's new stuff to focus on. So,
well, it's worse than that. They got fixed.
Right.
They're not a problem. They're not a problem anymore. Right. A problem cited is a problem dealt with. Mm-hmm. We used to have a joke. I had a bad manager once in a job from 1981 to 84. We used to say, sir, and I don't want to mention names, sir, we've got a problem with this. And his response once was, yes, you mentioned that last month. We said, well, there's been no solution for the full month. And he said, yes, but we have cited that as a problem. Okay, so a problem cited is a problem dealt with? I don't think so. No, what they're doing is they're dealing with these problems with more phony money. And you know, the biggest paper mache out there is something that may just paper mache over the whole world's assets. The Ron Paul independent audit of the Fed in 08 and 09 as part of the FinReg bill, Dodd-Frank, call what you want, it revealed two major tranches of loans to Federal Reserve owners, families, and friends of $23 trillion. Right. You can do a lot of shopping with $23 trillion.
Unbelievable. You could buy a lot of physical gold at depressed prices, too.
Well, yeah, but I don't think that's... I think they don't need to buy that because they already stole so much of it.
Right.
I mean, they stole Libya's gold. We're stealing the thunder for the third and final topic here.
Yeah. Well, on that note, shall we move into that topic, Jim?
Yeah, gold.
Gold. What differs? What differs with the infrastructure, should I say, of the system in rigging the gold price versus rigging other things like interest rates, like we mentioned earlier?
Uh, they can't do it with paper mache. I mean, that form of paper mache is paper gold contracts, the shuffling of paper gold, and the naked shorting to suppress the price, and the forex derivatives tying the paper currencies that are unbacked, meaning no gold back on their currency foundation. They run out of things to back it with. There's an end of the road to the gold suppression game. And the end of the road comes, and we knew about this years ago, but we were nowhere near the end of that road. You need physical gold to reinforce the paper gold contracts. You don't have the right to produce your paper gold vehicles on the stage where gold is run by paper unless you've got some real gold behind it. It's kind of like, well, I run out of collateral in my house, so I can't tap the equity on my home anymore to produce phony money off the real asset collateral. Mm-hmm. So, you get stories like a year ago, 2 years ago, more like 2 years ago, you heard reports that, well, there's 70 ounces of gold claims, paper gold claims, for every ounce of real gold. Well, now it's over 100. Mm-hmm. When you get to a certain point, you lose the credibility and you lose the ability to just march on with yet more toxic paper gold, because it gets pushed aside and it doesn't get recognized. The ratio of gold claims to physical gold right now is the big problem. It's over 100 to 1. The West is out of gold. And we have been told for 2 years or so the Chinese are going to pull the plug when there's no more Western gold to drain. Well, that's a nice, simple sounding statement, but it makes a lot of sense. Maybe they took over the Fed and seized JP Morgan's headquarters, which has a tunnel underneath, 5 stories under, a tunnel to the Federal Reserve, New York Fed. Maybe the Chinese took over the Fed and JP Morgan because there's no more gold to take from the United States. So maybe we're already at the end game here, and we're going to see other kinds of events. Maybe the Chinese set up the Shanghai Gold Exchange because they wanted a legitimate market for gold when they had pretty well drained New York and London of its gold. And I'd like to add that maybe Basel, Switzerland, and Rome, the Holy See, hardly holy, maybe they are getting tired of shipping off good gold that ends up sent out of the system only to find its way into the Chinese vaults and other Asian vaults. So I think we're in an end game here. Well, they're running out of their devices to keep the gold price down. And now, you got a strange event as a result of the major whacking down to 1,200 or lower in gold. Might have jumped up a little. I honestly, this is the God's honest truth. I don't check the gold price. Mm-hmm. It's not interesting.
Right.
Why would I want to check what Al Capone is selling widgets for? Mm-hmm. I don't care. That's not the story. The story is, how and when will China pull the plug? And I thought for the longest time that we were going to see, some bank failures. We were going to see contagion from a middle-sized bank, from a correspondent bank intermediary, and it was going to hit a big bank, and before you know it, another big bank would get hit. I thought a good test case was the Portuguese BES, Banco Espírito Santo incident. It didn't happen. And my colleagues, including The Voice, are saying, we don't really think it's going to happen that way because the patches are too effective. For a patched paper system, you use paper mache, and it holds until you get enough rain and it washes away, makes some more holes. We're instead going to see what I'm told. I mean, I don't like hoping, but I think this might actually happen. I think we're going to see, from what I'm told, the Chinese in Shanghai, who are already noticing a very sharp, I shouldn't say sharp, a very dangerous low level of silver in their inventory. Mm-hmm. They're running out of silver. I tell folks, look, Shanghai is not their only stockpile. Mm-hmm. It's a big country, right, a big population, a lot of industry now. My guess is they've got a few stockpiles. I wouldn't be surprised if their 2 sovereign wealth funds have stockpiles. But the visible stockpile is the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So when they're down low and they're facing their own default, they have 2 options. They can declare a default and say the world's a mess and we're going to seek help from the West because they're experts in fixing things. Or they could do something different. They could say, we're going to declare a $3,000 gold price. We're going to declare a $50 silver price, and we're going to encourage output from the world's legitimate systems, as in mines, scrap, and, say, estate sales, like silverware. Right. There's a lot of silver in silverware from, older folks and their kids who inherited sitting in the basement.
Yeah, my mom has tea sets of the stuff, probably 1,000 ounces plus, yeah.
Well, if you're just one person, one family, and you've got, say, a 20-piece silver set, are you going to bring it out and sell it into $17 per ounce? No, you're going to wait. So maybe they're waiting for some better price, and maybe they'll see the better price when China announces a $50 silver price and a $3,000 gold price. And I'd like to point out, that event will be enormously disruptive. Mm-hmm. It will cause all of the Forex gold derivatives to go bust, and all the banks that are holding them to face immediate annihilation. So, when the Chinese, if the Chinese do this and take this major, bold step, they can look back in the past and say, we're sorry, but it had a detrimental effect on the West, and it really wasn't our intention. But, to be honest, let's be real. You guys didn't really run honest markets. Okay, contrast that with a different approach that China could have taken in the last year of just pulling the plug on a couple of big European banks and forcing their death. Well, you look back later and you say, those nasty Chinese, they killed a couple banks and caused a contagion. It's all their fault. They're mean people. But when you double and triple the gold and silver price, you try to bring about an equilibrium in an equitable, fair market. By equitable and fair, I mean equilibrium of supply and demand that forces a balance. We don't have that now. Mm-hmm. We don't have any balance whatsoever. So that is the shock that I think is coming. I don't like saying I hope is coming, but I certainly do hope it. There's an old saying that I learned years and years ago with fellow stock investors where we lost some money in 2000. Hope is very, very expensive. Mm-hmm. So don't rely on hope. Rely on fact, rely on sources, rely on analysis, rely on good understanding of the dynamics involved. And that's what I think we do at the Hat Trick Letter. This gold market, I kind of laugh when I see 1,200. Mm-hmm. And I don't say, oh, boo-hoo, my friends who need to sell a few, they're in trouble. Yeah, they're in trouble. They had a bad plan. It's too bad. Yep. What I think instead is we're nearing the end. Mm-hmm. They cannot. This is evidence of absolute desperation, and it forces some mining companies into mothballing their projects. They feel bad about really, I think, exploiting unwisely their best properties.
Right.
The best properties have gold at 900. Why would you want to sell your gold at $900 cost and make only $300 per ounce? You can't finance the rest of your business with that. You can't finance the marginal mines.
Right.
Now, you need a better gold price, and that's why I applaud First Majestic for withholding, I think it was 900,000 ounces of silver.
Wow.
That's a lot of silver.
That's a lot of silver.
Oh. Oh boy, the last topic, Will, is a real favorite topic of mine, the petrodollar. I don't know how you want to cover this, but the Saudis are at the center of this.
Yeah, this is an interesting piece, Jim, that you sent me last night or this morning to include on the interview today, and with some commentary from I think it's Fabian for Liberty. I'll put a link to his video in the description here. But regarding the oil price and the Saudis, potentially reasons for benefiting from this lower oil price. What do you see?
Well, Fabian Calvo made the point well, and it's one of 6 angles I have regarding Saudis, petrodollar, and its fate. I won't say to defend it. I won't say to attack it. I'll say to describe or lead to its fate. And I don't think it has a good fate. But he said that the Saudis are engaged now in a price war with respect to their OPEC fellow members. Now, I just saw a list of all the different cost per barrel of oil. And, some of the best are in the Gulf region. Mm-hmm. Kuwait and Qatar, UAE, Saudi, they're all good. They're all within, I don't know, about $10 of each other per barrel. They're all really favorable. Mm-hmm. Okay. I was very surprised to see Saudi Arabian cost at about 40%, 35 to 40% lower than Iran. I don't know why Iran's costs are considerably higher. So if the Saudis lower the price, maybe so will the Gulf neighbors. But I doubt Nigeria will like it. I doubt Indonesia will like it. Mm-hmm. I doubt Angola will like it. So Mexico, they won't like it. Mm-hmm. All those countries are in much worse fiscal condition than the Saudis and the Gulf nations. By the way, the Gulf nations hold combined $2.2 trillion worth of sovereign wealth funds. Mm-hmm. That includes about 5 or 6 different nations and their various funds. I would be willing to bet you that at least 50 and maybe as much as 70%, 60% of that 2 trillion, so consider it maybe $1 trillion or a little more,
the Saudis,
is in dollars. So they're vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But I believe that the Saudis are engaged in a price war, and the damage will be done to the non-Arab OPEC members. Now, Calvo's theory is that the Saudi price drop will fracture the OPEC as a cartel. And I'm thinking if that's the case, and it very possibly is, the Saudis might be looking to see OPEC announce that they take non-dollar payments for oil. Mm-hmm. And no longer would the Saudis take and shoulder the full blame for busting the petrodollar.
Very interesting, Jim, how much of this staged fiasco globally going on has to do with not taking the fall, not being China doesn't want to be the one who was the fall guy for taking down banks, so they want to do it more strategically. Same thing here.
Yes, it is. I think it's because they don't want to have an accidental nuclear accident inside their country.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Those accidents are hellacious.
Okay, that's one of 6 points. There's another theory that the Chinese asked the Saudis to do this because the Chinese want to boost to their own economy and want to build up some of their own infrastructure and economic build out. They're not done with their, industrialization, and the low oil price can really help. Who's the Saudis' number one customer?
China.
It's not the U.S. anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and furthermore, maybe the Saudis are looking, this is the second point, maybe the Saudis are thinking, we got our gold stolen by the Americans and the Swiss banks. We don't like that. And we're tired of them giving us orders. So what do you say we lower the price of oil and just kick the table over for all their shale and fracking, that whole sector. Just kick it over, because it's the highest cost oil produced in the United States, the most vulnerable, therefore. So that's a possibility. And I don't know why the Chinese might be motivated to do that, except just simple vengeance, tired of all the different nonsense that Washington provides Beijing in the form of trade friction and, contaminated, molded wheat. They found GMO in what was it, wheat or soybean, and the U.S. promises that none of the exports to China will be GMO, meaning, genetically modified.
Right.
I mean, we took a potentially very favorable industry of genetic modification, where it was going to reduce the insects, reduce bacteria, make it more sturdy for crops, and instead we integrated, virus delivery systems.
Yep.
So pretty sickening. Okay, those are three. Here's another. I guess some of them overlap. Yeah, support to the U.S. dollar. The negative correlation is very obvious. You reduce the oil price and you lift the dollar. As the dollar rises, the oil price falls. It's kind of like a system balancing technique where the two are negatively correlated, so that the real price after inflation, after currency moves for oil doesn't really move much. Okay, that's very possible. But the U.S. folks might have said to the Saudis, let's bring down this price. It'll help the U.S. economy because, we're in this chronic recession that we like to call sluggish recovery. Okay, the last reason is very real and has been used before, this weapon, to render harm to the Russians for their major income source. They make a lot of money with gas, but they also make a tremendous amount of money with oil. Their pipeline systems are for oil and gas. I don't know what ratio of Russian exports goes by way of tanker versus pipelines, but the pipelines are rather extensive in some of the southern republics called the former Soviet republics. So we got a lot of conflicting factors regarding the Saudis, but I like to point to the long range. The long range is the Saudis see the petrodollar going away. The long range is the Saudis see the need to make an alliance with China. The long range sees the Russians making inroads into the Gulf region, especially with Qatar, on natural gas with LNG technology. The Saudis see the long-range plans of Iranian gas reaching the Mediterranean and entering into the Gazprom networks for European customer delivery. And of course, ISIS is designed to interrupt that. But let's not get into ISIS at all. I prefer to leave that completely alone because it's such a big, nasty, ugly topic.
Sure.
Yet another Langley device. But many are the tools here, but I think the Chinese realize their future is in partnering with China. And, we got the petrodollar. It's pretty hard to call it a gaso yuan. That doesn't roll off the tongue very well. But you're basically going to see, I believe, the Russian and Chinese currencies tied with oil and gas.
Right.
And I think it's going to be a big piece, somehow in its foundation, to the BRICS gold and silver backed currency with an oil and gas foundation of some sort. And that's where the complexity is going to be in the setup of the BRICS new currency that will bypass the IMF's SDR. The BRIC nations have to come up with linkage of oil and gas to the ruble and yuan, and at the same time making convertible to gold and silver. It's a complex task. I wish them the best of luck, because it is the solution for the malaise, the contamination, the breakdown, the wrong-footed system that we have. We're not liquidating the big banks. We're not moving toward the gold standard. Instead, we're amplifying QE with over $1 trillion a year, and we're relying on wars. I would much rather have a legitimate monetary system than fraud and war. If that makes me anti-patriotic, then I'm anti-patriotic. But I believe in gold and silver. It's in the Constitution of the United States. It's a long-standing, stable device for monetary systems. We had 1 century of gold standard without much in the way of price inflation because we were on the gold standard. But notice in the late 1800s, we had a series of assassinated presidents in the United States. Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, they all liked gold.
Yep, and silver.
Gold, silver, bimetallic.
Yep.
And Kennedy, I think one of the 3 motives for killing Kennedy was his desire to return to basically the gold standard. They call it the silver certificate.
Silver shirts, yeah.
Yeah. But, we are a raped and pillaged nation in the United States, exploited and colonized with hidden control strings and deep cables. And the only way to get out of it is to go back to the gold standard. But unfortunately, when that happens, the United States is going to be in real deep trouble because of the debts it's accumulated.
And the isolationism that we've driven, it's driven itself into. Jim, you're not unpatriotic, my friend. You're just pissed off and tired of being manipulated and poisoned and lied to. And
I'm
so
also
am
tired
I.
of having my life threatened twice.
Yeah. No,
I don't like it.
If you live in this country, it's life-threatening. I mean, how many chemicals? Anyway, I don't want to go off on that tangent, but I think it's not just about gold. It's about honesty, right? I mean, I kind of want this BRICS and this Eastern power to emerge because the guys that are driving driving the bus over here are insane criminals. I mean, it's. Anyway, it seems like the infrastructure that is attempting to be put in place on the other side is for an honest discovery or an honest trade, and that's all that I can hope for anyway.
The United States cannot expect to hand over to foreign suppliers treasury bonds any longer in order to receive finished products and raw materials. Mm-hmm. To consider that, to consider advocates of a legitimate trade system and a legitimate monetary system to be against U.S. interests, I would say those who are defining the U.S. interests are incorrect.
Yep, exactly right.
That's where I prefer to leave it.
Jim, unless you want to touch on anything else, we're right at an hour. I always appreciate everything you have to add. For those of you guys out there, please check out goldenjackass.com and the Hat Trick Letter if you want to be plugged into Jim's work. How often do you release the Hat Trick Letter?
It's once a month, but it has 2 different reports. So there's a money war report and a gold and currency report. 2 separate reports each month. And I've just hit some major milestones, a 3rd milestone this week, and I'm very pleased about progress. What I'm noticing in the last 3 months, Will, is a lot of distress within the client base, direct comments about losing job, business is way down, need to cut back expenses, not certain about my pension anymore.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of deep worry just in the last 3 months. It started in August. And it's reflected in certain metrics that I keep. I'd like to close just by saying that Russia and the East are working toward energy pipelines, while we in the West are working in pipelines of toxic money, fiat paper, and liquidity networks. Okay? So, who's on the right side? Who's on the legitimate side? Who's on the honorable side? Who's on the side with integrity? I'm not on the side with war and fraud. I'm on the side with legitimate trade settlement and sound money backed by gold.
Jim,
these used to be fine American principles, but something happened in the 70s and 80s.
Jim, that's why we like you so much. That's why your message is extremely well received. Obviously, you have connections. You have your ear to the ground. You're able to share incredible insight and information with us. But your numbers show it, man. People support you and follow you because of that and many other reasons. So we thank you.